Okay. Hello, everyone. It's 12 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. My name is Mary Collier. I'm the Professional Development Program Manager at the Ontario Museum Association, and I am very glad to welcome you to this first webinar in the Indigenous Collections Symposium series. I want to start off by first acknowledging that Toronto, where the OMA offices are and where I'm broadcasting from, has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years, and this land is the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Cred Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat. Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. Before we jump into the content, I want to make sure that everybody knows how to participate today. See the slides, and you can hear the presenter speak. If you have a question, you can just, or if you'd like to make a comment to the presenters, you can simply type your message into the chat box at the right side of your screen and click send. So we're monitoring the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. But if you're having any technical issues, Josh Lichty here at the OMA is signed in as an attendee, and you can send him a message through the chat for assistance as well. I would like to recognize the project partners for the Indigenous Collections Symposium, the Daiahohage, the Indigenous Knowledge Center at the Six Nations Polytechnic, the Woodland Cultural Center, and the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. And of course, the Government of Canada for funding this project, so many thanks for that. So the theme of the Indigenous Collections Symposium is Promising Practices, Challenging Issues, and Changing the System. So the speakers at the symposium itself will be talking about a lot of these things, these issues, practices, and changes that need to be made going forward. The purpose of these webinars is really to provide some context for those conversations to happen. Today we're starting by talking about the report Task Force on Museums and First Peoples, which was released in 1992, if I'm not, yes, two, and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that were released in 2015, and what some museums have done in response to those documents. So the conversation in which we'll be participating at the symposium in March is one that has been ongoing for many years. To have two presenters with us today. Trudy is a retired curator from the Royal Ontario Museum, but she's also the co-chair with Tom Hill of the Task Force on Museums and First Peoples. And Paula is a museum curator at the Woodland Cultural Center. So I want to thank both Trudy and Paula for joining us today. Just a little down of how this is going to work. Trudy and Paula are going to do their presentations, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. At this point, I am going to pass the mic to Trudy, and we'll get started.
I'd like to thank the OMA for inviting me to speak about the task force. It was a valuable experience, and I may reminisce a little bit as I go through this. It is the Task Force on Museums and First Peoples issued its final report following a 2-year national consultation. I would like to say at the outset that working on the task force was one of the most rewarding experiences of my museum career. To be is part of the legacy of the cultural showcase of the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. This advertisement for the upcoming exhibit promised it would be an exciting event, and it was, in more ways than one. The exhibit brought together many of the earliest extant examples of First Peoples cultural objects from museums around the world, entitled The Spirit Sings, Artistic Traditions of Canada's First Peoples. Having at the Glen Museum during the Olympics, the exhibit moved on to Ottawa. Richly illustrated catalog essays prepared by a team of curators remain an important source of information about the traditional cultures of First Peoples in Canada to the present day. They became entangled in controversy because the major corporate sponsor was an oil company. Shell and other oil companies were heavily involved in exploration activities in northern Alberta, in particular on lands claimed by the Lubicon Cree First Nation. Years of negotiations with provincial and federal governments had failed to settle the land claim of the Lubicon people, all while oil companies were being licensed to carry out explorations with negative effects on the land and game resources. The Winter Olympics in Calgary provided an opportunity to bring the grievances of the Lubicon First Nation to the attention of a worldwide audience. The drew protests, including international boycotts for a boycott, artistic interventions, as illustrated here, Rebecca Belmore's performance piece entitled Artifact Number 671B. Of the protests, the Assembly of First Nations, the Canadian Museums Association, and the Museum of Civilization, as it was then known, organized a national conference at Carleton University in Ottawa to coincide with the end of the exhibit at the Ottawa venue. Per Heritage, a work conference between museums and First Peoples, brought together 150 delegates from Indigenous and cultural communities from across Canada for 3 days of discussion. The major focus of the conference was to define the work needed for true partnership between museums and First Peoples. The consensus of the conference delegates was that a task force was required to conduct a nationwide consultation to identify outstanding issues and to make recommendations to facilitate productive relationships going forward. Established in 1989, the title, Turning the Page, Forging New Partnerships Between Museums and First Peoples, reflected the stated mission of the task force, which was to develop an ethical framework and strategies by which Aboriginal peoples and cultural institutions could work together to represent Aboriginal history and culture. The task force was a joint project of the Assembly of First Nations and the Canadian Museum Association, but it operated at arm's length as an independent body. Members were limited to 25 individuals, including Native elders, who had extensive experience working in the area of Aboriginal cultural heritage. This ended shots of task force members in working meetings. Members are chosen on the basis of their expertise and not representatives from any institutions or organizations with which they may have been affiliated. In practice, the task force members worked primarily as 3 regional committees representing Western, Central, and Eastern Canada. Each committee was charged with the responsibility to consult with First Peoples and other organizations, institutions, and communities within their specified regions. 1,000 invitations to make submissions on the issues before the task force were distributed to Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal cultural, educational, political, and governmental organizations. 47 individuals and institutions took advantage of the opportunity to do so. These organizations generated a great deal of information and a great deal of paper. Here, co-chair Tom Hill concentrates on documents at a meeting held at the Woodland Cultural Center. The final committees were presented to 3 meetings of the full membership held in Regina, Winnipeg, and at Six Nations. The results and the volunteered submissions were reviewed and a clear set of issues emerged. A draft report began to take shape. The report was published in 1992 and has been distributed and reviewed internationally. Many task force members presented papers at museum and scholarly conferences across North America. The body the report details the issues identified through the national consultations and discusses principles and recommendations for creating partnerships between First Peoples and museums. The 47 written submissions are included in précis form. The report includes a sampling of existing collaborative projects which ranged from exhibitions to policies concerning religious and ceremonial objects to training in archaeological methods. The report lists the names of task force members. The findings of the national consultations by the task force are listed on this slide. The consultations left no doubt that First Peoples are interested in objects that relate to their cultures and histories. Object and museum collections may include beliefs and values that are significant in maintaining cultural practices and identities across generations. They are sources of learning, pride, and self-esteem to communities. For reasons, access to museum collections and research about them is important. It was recognized that exhibitions of these same objects can contribute to public awareness and appreciation of First Peoples' cultural contributions. But peoples need to be involved with the interpretation of their cultures and histories in exhibitions, programs, and all other facets of museum work. Concerns expressed for the lack of contemporary works by artists of Indigenous ancestry in museum exhibits and collections. There was consensus in favor of the return of human remains, illegally obtained objects, and objects considered sacred or of special significance to cultural patrimony. It was recognized that returns should only be made to communities where direct prior cultural connection and ownership could be demonstrated. First Peoples representatives need to be involved in resolving repatriation issues, and moral and ethical criteria are favored over a strictly legalistic approach. Training First Peoples in all phases of museum work was cited as necessary to enable them to work in established institutions or develop museums in their own communities. Conversely, museum personnel require training in the cultures and values of First Peoples in order to better care for and interpret collections and to work more effectively as partners with First Peoples communities. There was strong interest in the development of cultural facilities within communities that would be managed by First Peoples. These facilities would be centers of learning, they would reinforce positive identities, and they would support the socio-economic well-being of First Peoples communities. The last two items on the list are of long-standing, I might add, continuing concern. It's compiled a list of selected professional development opportunities in museum studies and related programs that were available to Indigenous museum and other professionals at the time. Jon Jesmiss, then National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, reflected on the demonstrations and calls for a boycott of the Glasgow exhibition The Spirit Sings in an article published in 1992. He wrote, "When the exhibition came to Ottawa, we had to ask the Indigenous community, what are we going to do? We could have continued the boycott. We needed to get beyond that. The reality was that two possible strong allies could have a working relationship in the future. That could be very different from what we have had in the past." Erasmus described the unsatisfactory past in the following words. "We have a phrase called Golden Age. We don't want to be depicted as we were when we were first discovered in our homeland in North America. We do not want museums to continue to present us as something from the past. We believe we are very, very much here now, and we are going to be very important in the future." Issues had been identified. Task force members turned their attention to defining guidelines that would promote future partnerships between First Peoples and museums. Two basic principles were fundamental to all guidelines. First, future partnerships must be between equals. Second, approaches to developing partnerships must be flexible, since no single set of recommendations could adequately address the cultural diversity of the First Peoples of Canada. The overall effect of the guidelines is to guarantee that First Peoples' voices and expertise would be a critical part of the development of all museum activities related to their histories and cultures. The task force report goes into some detail on what would be required of partnerships aimed at resolving issues of interpretation, access, repatriation, and training. The final section urges the federal government to provide funding over a 5-year period to assist in the implementation of the recommendations advanced by the task force. The required 5 years of funding failed, not too surprisingly, but that did not prevent cultural institutions and communities from beginning to implement task force recommendations, and in some cases continuing to do that kind of work. A 1995 questionnaire received responses from federal, provincial, regional, and First Nations institutions and organizations across Canada. The responses outlined many proactive projects, among them collaborative exhibitions and public programs, involvement of First Peoples communities and individuals in planning and decision-making processes, and that included board trustees, and support for First Peoples cultural institutions. Several respondents described the real benefits for museums when they engaged in collaborative approaches. These included greatly enhanced knowledge of the significance of collections and objects, the opportunity for museum staff to develop greater sensitivity toward and understanding of their cultural values and ways of doing things. In addition to filled-in questionnaires, the call for responses also yielded a listing of MAP grants awarded since 1992. 6 organizations and institutions funding for 36 collaborative projects. Several of the awards were made to projects submitted by First Nations institutions. The responses also included recommendations to improve access to collections and training. Some, such as the use of electronic databases, are now becoming standard. Others, such as funding sources of stable funding, remain an ongoing challenge. To give the last words to Jorge Erasmus, eloquently explained what the plan of First Peoples is with regard to having their cultures and histories displayed in public museums. As civilizations, as surviving cultures, as changing cultures, we want to look at a new partnership that we can build with institutions in Canada and elsewhere that will deal with our art, our culture, our beliefs, artifacts that are important to us, both past and present, and everything else that goes into the making of a complete people. We look at a challenging relationship, a relationship that will look at the ways, means, the guarantees so that Native people will be a full part of presentations, from originally sitting down and dreaming about what the exhibition should look like, to participating in selecting the artifacts and pieces of art, and making the final presentation to the public. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trudy. I'm going to pass it over to Paula now. And okay, Paula, you should be good to go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, from the land of the Haudenosaunee at the Woodland Cultural Center. I guess I do the slidey thing, right? So here I am, and happy Valentine's Day. So in case you're not aware of Woodland, there's actually 2 buildings. So this one is the actual residential school that greet you as you drive up the long driveway with trees that are dying now. And straight here from the Mohawk Institute, we are one of the earliest schools ever created in Canada. Overall, there were 140, and less than 20 remain. Large, I think about 7 in BC. Only 2 here in Ontario. The other one is now Algoma University. So I've never visited there, but I've heard that there are some outbuildings that still remain, but it's more functioning as an institution rather than giving any kind of history on residential schools in Canada. go back to the TRC recommendations. First of all, in 2007, that is when they instituted the settlement agreement. It was in the 1980s, early 90s when residential school survivors started to speak out about the atrocities that happened to them in the schools. And of course it came with a monetary restitution. So within that is when they decided to establish the TRC Commission. And that came about in 2008. And I believe this is their mandate.
Hi, Paula, it's Mary. Just a quick request if you could move your mic a little bit closer to your mouth so that we can voice a bit louder.
So I don't have a mic. I don't know where to find it.
Oh, okay.
So just talk louder.
That's it. Thanks, Paula.
So ever developed a logo or happened to through a creation of one, I just thought it was important that you understand and are aware of what the TRC logo represents. Basically, flames that make up the 7 sacred teachings of love, respect, courage, honesty, wisdom, humility, and truth. So what basically is they took recorded statements of survivors and they documented them and archived them for future purposes. They now have all been sent to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg, Manitoba. As I understand, the records are sealed, they're closed, and only the survivors can see their own records, but they cannot see anyone else's. Survivors are a bit concerned with the fact that they can't see other records, only because with us, people come here saying, my grandma attended in 1930, can I see her record? We have no records, we have no lists, so that's what we've been compiling now here at Woodland. Action, there's a total of 94. And anyone who's ever heard Minister Sinclair, who was the chairman of the TRC, you can Google him. There's awesome YouTube videos of him speaking. He's just a fabulous and very educated, just phenomenal gentleman. He requested that they be called to actions so that it creates an action that you can actually do something with. Just read and then carry on. And I believe someone did post the TRC website, but here it is here. And I'm just going to go through the listing so you can all read them. The slide or the photo is saying that there's just as many Native children in foster care or with children's aid than there are in residential schools. So again, still kind of happening within our institutions. In the reconciliation for the governments, listed as 44 of the calls to action, really insists that the government pays attention to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The acronym is Unrep, and again, there's a website that you can read all of the, I believe there's 47 articles, and basically human rights issues that have still not been addressed for Indigenous people. Just running through numbers 45 to 66. with the professional development and training for public servants, I know we've had groups or regional offices of the RCMP, the OPP, and Children's Aid all attending Woodland for a tour and a talk. And church apologies, I'll talk a bit more about that when we come to a specific example. Here's the ones that deal specifically with museums and archives, numbers 67 to 69, and is calling on the CMA to do collaborations with Native peoples. And if anyone receives the CMA announcements, Jameson Brant was just named and coordinate the Museums and Indigenous Issues project. It's upcoming in 2017. That was just announced February 3rd. And I know more is rolled out and announced at the upcoming CMA conference this year in Ottawa. And a link for the Library Archives Canada. It's a great resource. It's got a lot of the Indian Department records. And the Indian Department was one of the people or the groups that oversaw the residential schools along with churches. So there's a lot of quarterly reports that the principals of the schools had to send to Indian Affairs. So a lot of the information on all residential schools is in that link there. On to the last grouping of the TRC calls to actions, number 71 to 94. So I'm going too fast on them, but you can see it's very all-encompassing. It touches on every single aspect and institution of our daily lives, and it's hoping that we can move forward more collaboratively for the future. So I'm just tracking a bit to the Woodland Cultural Center and how we were established. Basically, as I understand, the residential school closed here at the end of the school year on June 30th, 1970, and it became a free-for-all for people to take whatever they wanted out of the school. In 72 was when it was under the Allied Indians, another Native Association at the time, to create cultivation centers for Native people and other people, of course. And there is our mandate. Once their recommendations were announced in 2015, Wood named Ground Zero, just flooded with calls, inquiries, people wanting to visit us. And last year we had 15,000 students come through our doors, and largely from the GTA, to learn about residential schools in Canada. In 2013, we had to evacuate the third story of the building due to water and mold issues. We used to house the language department. Now we had to move them to the second floor. And that is when the evidence was launched. And because school and the building and the lands are owned by Six Nations Council, elected council, they actually went to the council meeting and recommended that we have a community consultation on what to do with the school. Would have $3 million to do all the restoration that was required throughout the 40 some odd years we've been here operating. We've only had band-aid approaches to fixing leaks and the plumbing, and it still has the original heat system in the building. So luckily, we series of workshops We had older meetings. People attended here weren't just from Six Nations. They came from northern Quebec and all across Canada. So we should reach out to as many people as possible to see if they actually wanted to save the building or not. We understand that there's been other communities that have actually demolished it on purpose because of the bad memories. But of the responses, I think only 7 people wanted the building torn down, which was just 600, thought that it needed to be saved and to be a testament to residential schools and for it not to happen again. So that kind of kicked off just evidence. So broken down in a 3-phase restoration project, and I'm happy to say phase 1 is it's ongoing right now. January 1st, I believe they started, so half the building's under scaffolding, and we actually achieved the $1.52 million, and it was largely thanks to the Ontario provincial government that announced $1.4 million last year towards specifically the Mohawk Institute residential school and Save the Evidence campaign. It was by the Six Nations Council for $220,000, and then the Brantford City Council matched that. So we're underway. We are currently working on phase 2, and that is mechanical upgrades, HVAC, and that lovely from the nice volcano boilers that are pumping in hot water to heat the building, and it's about 140 degrees in there in the winter time. And then phase 3, which I've been researching for the past probably 4 years now, is interpretation, finding the bits and pieces that make up the dormitories and the schoolrooms, and trying to get those interpreted into the space. And we're looking at maybe 5 years till that happens. Here's a Truth and Reconciliation case study, and this just happened in 2016 by Samuel Thomas, who developed this Opening the Doors to Dialogue, and it was an art project, contemporary art, dealt with natives, non-natives, survivors, intergenerational family members, and the church. So you had a series of beading sessions throughout large southern Ontario. I think we had 8 of them. Started here and ended here. Went to Fort Erie, Niagara, Hamilton, and there's another one, Peterborough. And approximately 180 people participated in these beadwork sessions. We started strawberries because they are a healing source as well as ceremonial in Six Nations history. And people go to the room and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And it's important with survivors that were telling their stories for the first time, sharing in a public venue, to have church officials there responding to what they said, so that they're not just saying how they feel or laying blame with no one to receive it. So you can imagine it's pretty emotional, pretty intense. We did have counselors on hand with us at all times. I think the first hour I was the one looking for a counselor because it was emotional draining. I didn't participate in all of the 8 sessions, but Sam certainly endured it all, and he came out and he's smiling anyway. Looking forward to the next project he has in mind. And the dialogue was on display here from September, and we just took it down January 31st. So we're going to be creating it, and Sam and I are working on a dissemination project now for it to travel. So interest in Ottawa and Toronto, and I think Saskatchewan as well so far. So we'll be working on having that set up. Cool, because it's under construction now. Not accessible, so we're not giving tours. So what the Education Department developed is called the Survivor Series, and they started that in November. And our Orion room where this is held can seat 120 people. And I think the first week they announced the Survivor Series, the morning session is already filled. They do every other week. So now they're now doing 2 sessions per Monday and have different survivors that they rotate. We're very fortunate to have a close working relationship with a handful of survivors so that they can learn and can receive it from first-hand experience, not from reading about it in the archives. So we're all starting to document and record and videotape survivors as well, and looking for objects, artifacts, and photos all the time. And I'll just close with one of the recordings that we did with a survivor very near and dear to my heart, John Elliott. You can see him here. He celebrated his 80th birthday in November. I think he was about 10 years old in this photo. So that's to do. Yeah, here we go.
And then we walked outside the playroom, and they signed us, me and my brother and my sister. They took me and my brother down to Ohsweken.
Anyway, if you're on social media, please connect with us for the latest and greatest updates from the Woodland Cultural Center. And that is it for me.
Thanks, Paula. We do have some time now if anybody has any questions. If you want for Trudy and Paula, if you'd like to type those into the chat and send them off. Well, maybe typing or thinking. I want to start off with a question for Paula. So you already had a really powerful program with opening doors to dialogue at Woodland. But what recommendations would you have for museums who want to address issues of reconciliation but don't have a kind of direct connection to a collection or a site or a survivor community that Woodland does?
Like you so eloquently expressed your acknowledgement of traditional territories, I know a lot of other cities, counties, townships, museums, municipalities are also doing that. And the Sanderson Center in Brantford here is the most recent one that have collaborated on making sure, I guess, they get the wording right about being on the traditional territory of whatever nations they were a part of. You can also establish programming partnerships to see what other local First Nations cultural center or friendship centers you have in your area. And these do have friendships, and they meet needs of off-reserve First Nations individuals. There could be an opportunity to work with them on a future exhibit or a public program. You can also develop an Indigenous community engagement strategy and look how to engage Indigenous people into your programming, exhibitions, or organizations. I know I was at, I think it was an OMA conference not too long ago, and they were talking about how to address the immigrant communities that have been kind of dwelling in their communities in the museum's backyard. So it's kind of the same thing, I would think. You can TRC calls to action, of course. And any one of the 94 calls to action is something anyone can work on. Is that it?
That's great. Thanks, Paula. We did from somebody who was wondering about the video that you played, and if there are others like that available online somewhere. Are those available to the public?
Not right now. We're working on recording survivors, as I had said. We know they're not going to be fortunate to have them around forever. So we're trying to capture as many stories as we can. And within the Survivors series, they also have a video that they did of kind of a virtual tour video on tour with the museum. What is she called? Museum Vader of it. So no, the answer is no, they're not available online. Now it's only at Woodland.
All right, another question, and this is for, I guess, either Paula or Trudy. So 1992 document, is that the most current document to work from, and is it still relevant?
I say it has served as an excellent guideline over the years. Other than the 1995 survey to see what was happening with the guidelines, I don't think there has been an update, although the project that Jesmiss and Brant is now going to begin, I think will go on way to providing that update. Is it still relevant? Absolutely. It's probably worth pointing out that some of these kind of collaborations were going on before the task force. In many institutions, it was adult conversation, I think, for some museums to figure out how to work with nations. Perhaps some fear, some concern, lack of knowledge. And one thing that the conferences and the task force did, rather dramatically, was clear some air. And when I went to the first conference, Preserving Our Heritage, I was a little concerned about what might be going on there. But in fact, it did give people to voice their a chance to voice their concerns. But it also showed that there was an interest in working together, and all of a sudden there were avenues for collaboration. And so I think keeping those principles in mind and ongoing projects has been important right to the present day.
And I'm going to spring a question on you, Trudy. In your work at Braille Ontario Museum, was there anything that you did coming out of the task force was kind of specifically in response to that experience?
Yeah. The museum very kindly funded all the curators in the anthropology section to go to the conference at which the task force report was presented. And it attention up to the level of the board, and they adopted the principles in the task force at the board level. I think it was the first time that formal written repatriation policies were written, and they're still online at the board. No project at the ROM, or the exhibition and programming, would go ahead without collaboration, without involving persons. So, yeah, there were some very immediate ones, and I would say it raised the sensitivity of all levels of the museum.
Great, you. And there was a question about if Jameson is going to the CMA, who is going to be coordinating the Aboriginal training program in museum practices at the Museum of History. If anybody else has the answer to that question, we might have to ask Jameson herself. Luckily, she's going to be speaking at the symposium, so I'm sure she can give us a bit of an update. But certainly that training program is a really important one to have been developed, and I think it's going anywhere. So we'll get from Jameson herself though at the symposium. Are there any other questions for Paula or Trudy at this point? I guess I want to thank everybody, Trudy and Paula, for sharing their presentations today. I would want to thank again our project partners and the Government of Canada for supporting this webinar and the symposium itself. Thank you everybody for signing in today. When you leave the webinar, you'll be directed to a short evaluation form. If you could take a couple minutes to let us have a little bit of feedback, that would be great. And the second webinar in the series is going to be taking place on February 24th at noon again, and it's an introduction to residential schools in Ontario, histories and interpretation. So we'll have speakers from both the Woodland Cultural Centre and the Shingwak Residential School Centre that Paula mentioned up in St. Marie. Thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.